Okay, this is a chance to talk a little bit about using your pencil as a measuring device and one or two um, basic observations that immediately can be put to use when trying to control perspective and proportion. And then this will be followed up by more detail about perspective. I've drawn quickly this little imaginary table. Not sure that the proportions are exactly correct, but I think it'll be enough for what we're doing. Let me just mention one thing that's really valuable. As you're drawing in perspective, the edges of your sheet, the edges of the rectangle are incredibly important. And the vertical edges represent vertical in space. And the grid that I've talked about a few times and that I want you to kind of cultivate mentally to be able to kind of place the relationships of things within the rectangle are going to be determined by and parallel to the horizontal and vertical edges of the paper. One tip that is really useful is that when you look around, if you look around where you are now, there are almost certainly some vertical constants, vertical edges, the edge of a door, the edge of a window or a cabinet, the place where two walls meet. These can be useful because you can refer to them when comparing other shapes. If you want to, if you're drawing somebody's face, you want to see what kind of angle their head is tilted at, you can compare it to that vertical. But another thing that's useful is 98% of the time, there's a little asterisk for the other 2%, which I'll mention briefly here and then mention a little bit more in the future. But 98% of the time or more, vertical lines that are in space, that edge of the doorway or the edge of the cabinet or the place where the wall meets the floor or the edge of the table leg, those things can go as vertical lines that are actually parallel to the vertical edge of your paper. And this is a really useful fact because it helps you to begin a lot of drawings and helps you to sort of anchor the positions of things in drawings. So a vertical in space, you can transfer it as a vertical to the page. The asterisk, the 2% I was talking about, is if you have a worm's eye view or a bird's eye view. If you're looking at this pencil, now you're looking way down on it, these edges may not be vertical, but it's fairly rare. So for now, just think about the verticals that you see from any distance can be vertical on your paper. Other thing I want to bring up in this little video is ways of measuring and comparing shapes and a very low-tech tool. If you have seen, which I assume most of you have at some point, the stereotypical idea of an artist. The artist is probably out on the, in the forest or on the side of a lake with an easel, and one thumb is through a palette with daubs of paint on it, and their other hand is held out at elbow length with their thumb sticking straight up into the air. Right? I'll hold it sideways, but this would be, from my perspective, the thumb sticking straight up in the air. What's that about? The thumb can be used for a couple of things in that situation, but mostly it's to measure and to compare shapes. How big is that shape compared to the shape next to it? How big is that shape compared to how wide it is? So how do you do that? I recommend that you use a pencil and not only your thumb for this purpose. And so the thing that you're going to do is hold the pencil with your elbow locked. And the reason for your elbow locked is because for this to work, to give you any meaningful feedback about the relationship between shapes, you have to be, your eye has to be exactly the same distance from the pencil. So you also don't want to do this. You don't want to tilt the pencil. Well, you might be able to get away with that, but you want to keep the pencil parallel to your eye. You don't want to tilt it this way or that, and you certainly don't want to bring it closer or farther. You'll get no useful information. So you lock your shoulder, you hold it straight up and down vertical, and then you decide on something in your drawing. I've made this perhaps not in perfect perspective, little drawing of a table, which is good enough, I think, for our demo here. You think of something that you want to use as your unit of measurement, right? You get to make a choice. So you could say the height of the corner of the table. That right there could be the unit number one, the unit of measurement. Or, this back leg shape from where you're looking, that could be your unit. Or the tricky one, the height of the top of the table. Maybe I'll talk a little more about heights of the top of the table. But for now, let's pick this, the corner closest to me. And it's very important to realize this all depends on your point of view, right? How big that shape is. It totally depends on where you are in relationship to it, how close it is to you. This height will not be the same as this height, although if you were to build the table, those would be the same, right? If you got out a measuring device on the piece of wood, those would be the same. But that's different when you're looking at something. The things that are closer to you are going to appear larger, and the things that are further away are going to appear smaller, even when, or exactly when, those things are the same size in terms of measurement in the three-dimensional world. So this is all about finding relationships that are actually there in terms of laying it down as a two-dimensional drawing and combating what you know. You might think a table, well, I know a table has a big, top like this, and it's got 4 legs that are all the same length. But of course, that doesn't give you anything like a picture of a table, right? That's not how a table looks when it sits in a room. So you would put your pencil from your point of view next to this. Put your thumb maybe at the bottom so that this becomes that height, and then you can take that and compare it to other things. You can compare it to this. How tall is this shape of the tabletop right above that corner? Is that one corner high? Is it maybe 1 1/4 corners high? It could be, depending on where you are, half a corner high or 2 corners high. So you use this to measure how tall is this compared to that? How tall is this compared to that? How tall is this compared to that shape between the wall and the bottom of the table, and so on. And you can also turn it sideways, as long as you keep it parallel to your eye, right? You don't do this. You don't tip it forward or backward. You can say, well, how tall is that compared to how wide the leg is, for example. And you can shift around and you say, okay, well, how wide is this leg compared to, I put my thumb there, compared to this leg in the background. The other thing that you can do with a pencil is look at, kind of get this out of the way, is to look at corner, at horizontal edges. Horizontal edges are not so simple. Vertical edges in the world, you can just put them down as vertical lines on your paper. Horizontal edges, not so much. So you can use the pencil as a horizontal constant. In this case, the point is to keep it absolutely parallel to your eyes. So you're not tilting it this way or that. You're keeping it the same level as your two eyes and the same distance from both eyes. So you're not tilting it this way or that. So then, if you're able to get that horizontal pencil, so I'm drawing a little picture of the pencil, the horizontal pencil. Not doing the greatest job, but I hope you get the idea. And now you see, we've been able to see here, maybe a little more vividly than you could without it, the angles compared to the horizontal that are formed here underneath the corner of the table. And you could do that up here and look at the angles that are formed here. You could do that if there were a wall, a ceiling here. You could put the pencil there and see more easily, what is that angle? What is that angle? And if you can figure out what that angle is, relationship to the horizontal, then you can transfer it to your page in relationship to the horizontal edge of the page. So if it's like, it's that angle, okay, here's my horizontal edge, then I can do that angle. I hope that makes sense. As long as I'm showing you a picture of a tabletop, I'll talk about this. Very soon I'm going to give you an assignment of putting some things on a table or a countertop and drawing them in perspective. And the trickiest thing for many, many people is to get the shape of the top of the table right. Because if you go back to what I was sketching up here, we know it's this big old thing. Some, the tables we use in the classroom, they're huge. You could lay on top of them. It's this big, expansive surface that goes into the distance. But that's not true in terms of the shape that you are seeing at a given time. It is determined by your point of view. If you get your eye level down to where it's even with the top of the table, that big shape that you could lie on the tabletop actually becomes just a line. So here, if you're measuring, you want to think, okay, look at this. If it's this wide, you take that height, maybe it's a little more than that wide there. It has nothing to do with the shape you're seeing and drawing, has nothing to do with what you know about the table if you were going to build it. It doesn't matter if this is 12 inches deep or 36 inches deep or 60 inches deep. What matters is the relationship between the shapes you see here. And so it's often the case that something like the edge of the table may actually, from some points of view, be a taller shape than the top of the table. So we'll talk more about that, but that's something to consider when you're drawing objects that are sitting on a flat surface. It will be an issue that everybody has to confront. But for now, the main thing is verticals stay vertical. You can use the pencil as a measuring device to compare the relationships between shapes, including negative shapes, and you can use it as a measuring device, as a horizontal constant, to line it up to your eyes and compare to the funny angles that you discover in various objects. And we'll get to more of this in the next video and in the next class.